Welcome to Miss Retro Reads. I've been thinking lately about a book I read my brother when he was very little, and it was called The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. And when we came to the end of it, I looked at him and said, "Gee, I wish it wasn't over." And then I said, "Why don't we read it again?" So that's what I'm doing here. I'm going to read it again. Chapter 1, Riverbank Friends. Mole had been working very hard all morning doing spring cleaning in his little home beneath a large meadow. He had been working with brooms and dusters and a pail of whitewash. When his aching back and weary arms couldn't lift the whitewash brush one more time, he flung it down and shouted out, "That's it! Hang spring cleaning!" He rushed out of his little door into the steep tunnel, stretching and scraping with his paws until his snout reached the bright sunlight in the meadow. The warm breezes and the happy songs of the birds welcomed him as he ran along on all fours. "I'm free!" he cried. "No more work for me. Let the birds work building their nests. Let the flowers work making buds, not me. It's time for me to have fun." Mole's happy wanderings took him to the edge of a gurgling, flowering river, the first he'd ever seen. "What a strange animal this is," he said. "It grips things and carries them along, only to fling them aside and catch something else, all while it's sparkling and chattering and bubbling." He ran alongside the river until he had tired himself out, and then he sat down on the bank and listened to the babbling stories the river seemed to be telling him. "And what's that?" he wondered, as he spotted a dark hole just above the water on the opposite side of the river. "It looks like a perfect home for any animal who enjoys a peaceful waterfront property." Soon something bright and twinkling winked at him from the hole. It was an eye, followed by the rest of a little brown face, small neat ears, and thick silky hair and whiskers. It was the water rat. The two animals looked cautiously at each other across the river. Then the water rat called out, "Hello, Mole. Would you like to come over?" "How do you expect me to do that? I'm not a water animal, so I don't swim." Rat chuckled as he untied a rope and pulled on it until a small blue boat appeared from behind some bushes. Since Mole was new to the river, he had no idea what a boat was or what it was used for. Rat rowed quickly across the river and held up his front paw to Mole, who eagerly stepped in and sat down. "This is my very first time in a boat," said Mole happily, as Rat shoved off and began to row again. "It's so nice. It's absolutely the only thing to be doing on a day like this. It doesn't matter whether you're going somewhere or nowhere, whether you're doing something or nothing. If you're doing it in a boat, it's the best time ever. Say, if you've got nothing to do for the rest of the day, we could row down the river together." Mole leaned back against the soft cushions and smiled dreamily. "That sounds wonderful," he said. "Let's start at once." "We will in just a minute. First I have to stop at my house," said Rat as he tied the boat up to a little dock and disappeared into his hole. A moment later he came out, staggering under the weight of a heavy wicker lunch basket. "Shove it under your feet," he said to Mole, and he jumped back into the boat and took up the oars again. "What's inside?" "Cold chicken, and cold tongue, cold ham, cold beef, pickled pickles, salad, French rolls, ginger beer, lemonade, and soda water." "Stop, stop!" cried Mole, overjoyed. "This is too much." "Do you really think so?" "It's only what I take on all my little excursions." Mole didn't hear a word Rat was saying as he lay back dreamily, trailing his paw in the water. The water rat, being a polite, considerate animal, didn't disturb his guest until Mole sighed blissfully. "Life on the river seems wonderful." "It is. The river is my food and drink. It's my company and my world. It gives me fun and excitement, whether it's flooding my basement in winter or drying up into a mud bed in summer." But isn't it a bit dull at times, with no one here to talk to? Rat sighed and smiled. You're new, of course, so you don't know. Riverbank is so crowded nowadays that many of my neighbors are moving away. But those that are still here are always wanting you to do something with them. And what's that? Asked Mole, pointing with his paw to some bark woods off to the side of the river. Oh, that's the Wild Wood. We Riverbank people don't go there very much. Why? Aren't the people there nice? Well, let's see. The squirrels and the rabbits are all right, but you never know with the weasels, and of course there's dear old Badger. Nobody bothers him. At least they'd better not. Mole was curious about Badger, but he knew that it was not polite for animals to ask why. So he pointed off into the distance and asked instead, And what's that blue and cloudy stuff beyond the Wild Wood? That's the wide world, and it's of no concern to us. I've never been there, and I'm never going, and neither are you if you've got any sense. Don't ever talk about it again, please. Mole was even more curious, but they had just reached a small lake, and Rat was heading towards the calm, grassy shore. We'll stop here for lunch, said Rat, as he tied the boat to a branch and helped Mole ashore. Please let me carry the lunch basket and unpack it, pleaded Mole. Rat was only too happy to let his excited guest do the work, and he sprawled out on the grass to rest. When the tablecloth had been spread and all the food packets opened, Rat sat up and said, Let's dig in. Mole was glad to dig in, since he had been hard at work with his spring cleaning all morning and hadn't stopped to eat. When both animals' stomachs had been filled, Mole turned his attention once more to the water and to a streak of bubbles traveling along the surface. What's that? He asked. Rat looked at the trail of bubbles and made a cheerful chirping sound in that direction. Moments later, the broad-whiskered head of Otter appeared on the surface and headed for the bank, hauling himself out of the water and shaking his glossy fur coat. Otter called out, What greedy beggars you are! Why didn't you invite me to your party, Ratty? We didn't plan this, explained Rat. It was an impromptu lunch. But I'd like you to meet my friend, Mr. Mole. Otter smiled and held out his webbed paw, which Mole shook. Then Otter went on to explain, Everyone seems to be out on the river today, so I came here to the lake to get some peace. But even here— At that moment a rustling noise in the hedge behind them turned their attention to the striped head and high shoulders of Badger coming towards them. Company, he grunted, then turned away from them and disappeared from view. Don't mind him, explained Rat. He just hates society. He won't bother us. Now, Mr. Otter, tell us who's the everyone out on the river today. Toad, for one, in his brand new boat, wearing brand new clothes and brand new everything. The two old friends looked at each other and began to laugh. Rat explained to Mole. For a time, Toad was interested only in sailing, and then he tired of that and took up punting, pushing a long pole along the bottom of the pond. Last year it was houseboats, and he swore he'd live on one for the rest of his life. We all had to live with him on it and pretended we liked it. He's the same with everything he takes up. He's interested in it for a while and then gets tired of it and goes on to something new. But he's such a good fellow, it's hard to refuse him anything, added Otter. All the same, he's not to be trusted in a boat. He can't seem to keep it right side up. Just then a canoe came into view. The short, stout figure paddling seemed to be having a hard time keeping the boat from rolling from side to side. Rat stood up to wave, but the paddler shook his head and kept on rowing as hard as he could. That's Toad, explained Otter. He'll be out of the boat and in the water in a minute if he keeps rolling like— But before Otter could finish his sentence, a mayfly flitted before him. In one swift movement, Otter snapped it into his mouth and disappeared back into the water, leaving only a streak of bubbles behind him. Although Mole was curious about Otter's sudden disappearance, he knew it would be impolite to ask why, so instead he offered to pack up the lunch basket. On the trip back, Mole was beginning to feel quite at home in a boat, but he was getting restless doing nothing. "Ratty, I want to row," he said. "Please let me." Rat smiled and shook his head. "Not yet, my young friend. You need a few lessons. It's not as easy as it looks." This quieted Mole, but only for a few minutes. His jealousy of Rat's skill in rowing was increasing. "I can do it just as well," he said to himself, and he jumped up and seized the oars so suddenly that Rat was taken by surprise and fell backwards into the boat. Mole took his place in the seat and reached the oars out towards the water. "Stop it, you silly fool!" cried Rat. "You don't know how to row. You'll turn us over." Mole tried to dip his oars into the water, but swung them at the air instead. The force of his swing sent his legs flying above his head, and he soon found himself laying on top of the outstretched Rat. He made a grab for the side of the boat, but the next moment, swoosh! Over went Mole, Rat, and the boat. The water was ever so cold and ever so wet, as it fills Mole's ears on the way down. He coughed and sputtered on the way back up, and was about to sink again when a firm paw gripped him by the back of the neck, and an oar was shoved under his arm. Rat was laughing as he dragged Mole to shore and hauled him up on the bank. "Now, my young friend," said Rat, as he wrung some of the wet out of him, "start running up and down the path until you're warm and dry. I'll dive for the things from the boat and recover the boat as well." A while later it was a shamefaced Mole who took his seat in the boat. "Ratty, my generous friend," he began, "I'm really very sorry for my foolish behavior. Can you forgive me and still consider me your friend?" "That's all right, dear Mole. What's a little water to a water rat? I'm in it more than I'm out of it anyway. Don't give it another thought. We'll head for home now. But I do think that you should stay at my house for a while. I can teach you to row and swim, and make you as handy on the water as any of us." "Oh, thank you, Ratty!" exclaimed Mole gratefully, as his eyes filled with tears. "You're the best friend I ever had, and this is the best day of my life." This, then, was the beginning of a wonderful summer. Mole learned to swim and to row. He learned the language of the river as it gurgled past his window, and he came to understand the whispers of the wind as it blew through the willows. Chapter 2. Mr. Toad of Toad Hall. One bright summer morning Rat was sitting on the river bank, singing a song as he had just made up, and not paying much attention to Mole, who was chattering beside him. After he had asked Rat the same question over and over, Mole tried one last time. "Ratty, please take me to meet Mr. Toad. You've talked about him so much that I'm really anxious to meet him." "Certainly," said Rat, jumping to his feet. "Why didn't you say so? We'll go immediately. Toad is always glad when visitors come, and sad when they leave. He's really quite good-natured, even though he's not too clever." The two animals jumped into the boat. By now, Mole had become a good oarsman, so he began to row. When they reached a bend in the river, a fine-looking brick house came into view. Its well-kept lawns and colorful flower beds reached down to the river. "That's Toad Hall," said Rat. "It's one of the nicest houses in these parts, though we never admit it to Toad because he's so boastful and conceited. On the right are his stables, and on the left, by the creek, is the boathouse, where we'll leave the boat." "But the sign of the boathouse says, 'Private, no landing allowed,'" argued Mole. "Don't pay any attention to that." Once they had rowed into the boathouse, Mole looked at all the fine boats hanging from the beams and pulled up on the slips. "Why aren't any of them in the water?" When Toad became interested in boating, that was all he spent his money on. But I guess he's gotten tired of it and has taken up some new fad to keep busy with. We'll find out soon enough. Once their boat was tied up, Rat and Mole headed across the lawn. They found Toad relaxing in a garden chair, busy examining a large map spread out across his knees. Seeing his visitors, Toad jumped up and called, "This is wonderful, Ratty! I see you've brought a friend. I was just about to send a boat for you. I need your help." "With your rowing, I'd guess," said Rat. "Your oars have been splashing too much—" "Oh, pooh!" interrupted Toad. "I gave up boating long ago. It was a waste of time. I've discovered the only really worthwhile occupation to devote my life to. Come with me, dear friends, and I'll show you." Mr. Toad led them to the coach house. In front of it was a shining red gypsy wagon. "There it is," he announced. "This little cart will take me on all sorts of adventures along the open road, into villages and towns and cities. I'll be able to travel the whole world whenever I please. Come inside and see how I furnished it." As they stepped inside, Toad said proudly, "See how comfortable this is. I've got sleeping bunks, a folding table, a stove, bookshelves, pots, pans, biscuits and lobsters and bacon and cards and dominoes. Everything's here that we'll need for our journey this afternoon." "Did I hear you say will and journey and this afternoon?" asked Rat. "Now, dear Ratty, don't go getting upset," pleaded Toad. "You've just got to come. I couldn't possibly manage without you. You really can't want to stick to your musty old river all your life and only go boating. I'm going to show you the world, my boy. I'm going to stick to my river and go boating just as I've always done. And Mole is going to do it with me, too." "I'll go along with whatever you say, Rat," said Mole loyally. "But I must admit, Toad's adventure does sound like fun." Toad was watching them both very closely and decided not to push Rat for now. "Let's go into the house and have some lunch," he said. "We don't have to decide now, really. I was only planning the trip to please you." While they ate, Toad shrewdly gave his full attention to Mole, painting glorious pictures of the exciting times they could have on the trip. Soon everyone seemed to be taking the trip for granted, even Rat, who hated to disappoint his friends. When lunch was over, Toad led his friends to the stable and hitched his old gray horse to the wagon. Then the three friends set off along the road. It was a glorious day and the beginning of a glorious adventure. They traveled until late that evening, when they stopped to eat dinner on the grass beside the wagon. Once they were in their bunks in the wagon, Toad said sleepily, "This is the real life for gentlemen, not your old river." "But I like my life in the river," argued Rat. "I think about it all the time." Mole said, "If you're that unhappy, Ratty, I'll go home with you in the morning." "No, we'll stick to it. But thanks anyway. I have to stay just to be sure Toad is safe. Besides, this is another of his fads, and it won't last very long. They never do." The following morning Mole and Rat woke early and took care of the horse and made breakfast. By the time Toad woke up, everything had been done. "What an easy life this is!" he exclaimed. "No worries, no cares, no housework, no cooking." On the second night, the two guests made certain that Toad did his share of making dinner, and the following morning Toad was hauled out of bed to work alongside them. That afternoon they were walking beside the wagon along a hilly road when from behind them came a strange hum, almost like the buzz of a faraway bee. Glancing back, they saw a cloud of dust, with someone dark at the center. The cloud was coming closer at an incredible speed, with the buzz becoming a strange pop-pop noise. Then suddenly a huge shiny motor car appeared. Rat and Toad jumped off the road as the car sped past them towards the wagon. Mole tried to grab at the horse's reins, but the animal reared, plunged them both into a deep ditch, with the wagon crashing onto its side behind them, wrecked. Rat rushed back to the road, shaking his fist at the speeding car and shouting, "You villains! You scoundrels! I'll have the law on you!" Toad, however, sat down in the middle of the road and just stared in fascination at the disappearing motor car. Mole managed to quiet the horse, then went to inspect the wagon. What a sorry sight it was! Panels and windows were smashed, axles were bent, a wheel was off, and the food was scattered all over the ditch. Rat joined him, and even with the two of them pushing, there was no way they could right the wagon. "Hey, Toad," they called, "come help us." But Toad never answered them. He just sat still, staring as if in a trance. "Wonderful, glorious sight," he murmured dreamily. "That's the real way to travel, the only way to travel. Here today and gone tomorrow. And to think I never knew, I never even dreamt. Oh, what clouds of dust I'll kick up along the road! Oh, what horrid little wagons I'll fling into ditches!" "What are we going to do with him?" Mole asked Rat in alarm. "Nothing," answered Rat firmly. "I've seen him like this before, when he started on a new craze. He'll be in a happy dream for a few days and useless for anything else. But never mind him now. We've got to see what can be done about the wagon. It can't travel in the shape it's in. We'll have to get to town and send someone back to get it and repair it." And taking the horse's reins, Rat started to walk. "But what about Toad?" asked Mole. "We can't leave him sitting in the road like that. Suppose another one of those motor cars things come along. I've had enough of Toad for one day." The two friends hadn't gone very far when they heard a pattering of feet behind them. Toad caught up and pushed himself between them. He thrust a paw inside each animal's elbows, but still stared dreamily ahead. "Now look here, Toad," snapped Rat. "As soon as we get to town, you're going right to the police station and make a complaint against the owner of that car. Then you'll go to a blacksmith and have the wagon taken there and repaired. Mole and I will find an inn where we can stay until the wagon's fixed and you come to your senses." "Police station? Complaint?" murmured Toad dreamily. "Why would I complain about that beautiful heavenly car? And repair the wagon? Heavens, no! I never want to see that wagon or hear of it again. Oh, Ratty, how grateful I am to both of you. If you hadn't come on this trip with me, I never would have seen that glorious machine." "He's hopeless," said Rat. "As soon as we get to town, we'll take a train home." 7 miles later, they arrived at a town. After leaving Toad at the railroad station and paying a porter to watch him, Mole and Rat arranged for the horses to be taken to Toad Hall, for the wagon to be picked up and repaired. Eventually a train came along and took the three to a station near Toad Hall. Toad was still in his trance as Rat and Mole led him home and turned him over to his housekeeper. Then they got into their boat and rowed home. The following evening, after a day of lazying about on the river bank, Rat went out to visit some of his friends. When he returned, he brought news for Mole. "The whole town's talking about Toad today. He went into town on early train, and guess what he ordered? A very large and very expensive shiny motor car." And we will continue The Wind in the Willows next Wednesday. And thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads.